Uh, Thank you, Bernadette. So I'm Jan. Some of you know me. I'm on a path of helping organizations to become more humane. And what that means, I will try to explain during the session today. I brought with me two new sets of IDs, which I would like to check. Uh, One set of IDs was the basis to build a completely new kind of leadership development program, mainly based on Otto's insights, so the constructive developmental insights, combined with some other insights coming from philosophy, phenomenology, coming from structural work and complexity theories. So that's the journey I'm on. What I will share has been published in my latest Dutch book, which appeared in February this year. Most of the things have been incorporated in the latest book I wrote together with Otto, but I hope you will discover some new ideas too. It's my intention to make it very interactive. That means that we will use Mentimeter. So I hope everybody has either his mobile phone or can open a second screen to go to menti.com in just a moment. And I have foreseen a breakout room to check certain IDs. Let me go to my presentation. My title of this evening is to revolutionize leadership development. We really need a new type of leadership development. And my subtitle is Building More Humane Organizations. And why that is necessary, I will illustrate by a quote written by an artist, Friedrich Reich Hundertwasser, who at the end of his life, just before his death, wrote down some reflections on his life. And one of the things he wrote was, in 1953, I realized that the straight line leads to the downfall of mankind, but the straight line has become an absolute tyranny. The straight line is something cowardly drawn with a rule, without thought or feeling. It's a line which does not exist in nature. And that line is the rotten foundation of our doomed civilization. The straight line is aesthetic and immoral. The straight line is the only sterile line, the only line which does not suit man as an image of God. The straight line is the forbidden fruit. The straight line is the curse of our civilization. Any design undertaken with a straight line will be stillborn. Today we are witnessing the triumph of rationalist know-how, and yet, at the same time, we find ourselves confronted with emptiness, an aesthetic void, a desert of uniformity, criminal sterility, a loss of creative power. Even creativity is prefabricated. We have become impotent. We are no longer able to create, and that's our real illiteracy. I found it a wonderful quote to illustrate what is happening in companies. If we look at how strategy exercises, agile exercises, leadership development exercises, all kinds of exercises are undertaken in companies, and we look at the impact of those initiatives, we must observe that the impact is rather limited. And I hope we share the interest in leadership development. I've prepared a little Mentimeter exercise, and let me go to menti.com, and if you can open a screen so that every one of you can go to menti.com. Normally you should see the screen, and if you go to menti.com and enter the code you see at the top of the image 65561256, you will have a number of dimensions which you find in literature and are seen as very important dimensions in leadership development. And I was wondering what in this group is considered as the two most important dimensions in leadership development. So if you go to menti.com, enter the code, you can make a selection of two items, and they will immediately appear on the screen. So still 3 people left.
For some reason, I haven't been able to go to that second window. Sorry.
No problem. Is there anyone else who had problems going to menti.com? What would have been your choices, Otto?
Yeah, let me think about that. I think creating engagement for working on a next level of complexity would be my choice. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Can I ask someone who chose engaging in critical self-examination why he or she considers that as the most important dimension, one of the two most important dimensions? I don't see everyone on the screen, so I don't know whether someone is responding. If you respond, please unmute your mic.
I selected that one, Jan. I think anybody who is interested in leading needs to understand people. And I think that if you can't understand yourself, then you can't understand other people. So I see it as fundamental.
Okay. And what, according to you, Nick, would be the working mechanism in engaging in critical self-examination?
Well, I think there's a huge number of activities there. You could say meditation might be part of it.
Okay.
I think inviting feedback is another. Engaging in dialogue, perhaps, is another.
Okay. Yeah. And is it possible to hear someone who has chosen dephasing the existing equilibrium, letting go of existing practices? What resonated in that item? There must certainly be someone who...
It seems to me that we are always on the move from one equilibrium to another. And so the practices we follow are always changing on account of our moving in thought from one equilibrium to each other. So I didn't see the point of leaving anything behind, because it's simply not possible to leave behind what you have been, what you have done, because you cannot separate from it. You can try to overcome it, yes, but you cannot leave anything behind. You need all that you ever were, I think, to go on.
Yeah, it's correct. I don't know whether someone remarked that there is a difference between the first 4 and the second 4 items.
No.
Yeah, and I chose one from each. And I think I did that pretty deliberately to focus on the inside and the outside.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, the first 4 are the building blocks of the current management development or leadership development programs, while the right 4 are the dimensions emerging in a new type of leadership development programs. So the first 4, they work with a vision that you can call it a very rational vision, that you can identify gaps. If you invite people to reflect on those gaps, they will be able to make new choices, start building new competencies, and start experimenting with new roles. That's basically the line of thinking on which I would say about 80% of the leadership development, the current leadership development programs are built, while the second set of 4, surfacing diversity and tensions, creating engagement for working on the next level of complexity, and kind of growing to a new equilibrium, form the basis of the new emerging paradigms. And what I will try to share tonight is an example where we embraced the right 4 angles, integrated them into one program. If I go back to my presentation, we can ask ourselves the question, what hasn't changed in leadership development approaches over the last 80 to 100 years? Has anyone an idea what hasn't changed in leadership development programs? How they were done in the 60s, the 70s, the 90s, and the last 20 years?
Oh, we're still optimizing a machine.
Yes, we are considering people as machines that can be trained. They are kind of, we consider people as the dogs of Pavlov.
That's right.
As long as we create acceptable feedback loops, make clear what kind of behavior we expect them to adapt, we are convinced that we are working on development. And we all know that that doesn't fit the recent insights from different angles, both from complexity theory, from constructive developmental theory, even from philosophy. And the usual logic is that leadership development focuses on behavior, on mindset, and on performance. So improving employees' knowledge, their skills and attitudes will strengthen the organizational effectiveness and performance. And so the target for change and development is basically the individual. That's how leadership development is usually taught at business schools, also the business school where I teach. But there is a new emerging, more effective logic, namely that problems of organizational behavior and performance stem from a poorly designed and ineffectively managed system. So in recent leadership development programs, there is a kind of a shift from the individual to the system, whether that system is a whole of processes or an organizational structure. It seems that the balance between focus on the individual and focus on the organization as a system is now going to organizational interventions that can lead to individual development and changes. So changing the system becomes the primary focus, and the individual development is kind of a consequence of how we change the system. So the primary target for change and development is the organization, followed then by training or development for individuals. And it took me a while before I came to this type of insight. The work of Otto, I'm comparing that and what I did in the first half of my career, kind of organizational development and leadership development work. I tried to integrate the best possible practices. You all know this picture is the picture of the Biosphere 2, who in the 90s was built in, if I'm right, the Nevada desert in the United States. And in those buildings, an ecosystem was built with all the best knowledge biologists, physicists, everyone had on nature. So the purpose was to examine whether or not people could survive in a kind of a ecosystem based on the best possible knowledge of biology, of nature. And the purpose was to invite groups of people to stay there for several years. And it never succeeded in doing that for the simple reason that after 9 months, the trees just fell down. And it's a question to the group, does anyone know why the trees fell down? Does anyone has an idea?
No biodiversity?
No, the biodiversity was there. It was the best possible reflection of all the insights we had on how nature worked.
The microbiome, I think that wouldn't be as natural and as out there.
Well, that could be perhaps an explanation. The explanation that was given to me was that they forgot the wind. And the wind is necessary in order for the trees to grow. How do you call that? The wortels. I don't know the English word, but
the roots.
The roots, yes. In order to grow the roots, you need the wind. And the work with Otto helped me discover the 3 winds that we neglect in organizational development work. And the 3 wins that we neglect in almost any theory, whether it are theories about new organizational forms like sociocracy, holocracy, agile, Semco, Liquido, name it, and you will see that those 3 dimensions are absent. Also, the main current leadership development programs, they miss the 3 wins I will be talking about. The 3 wins have to do with design of work, and design of work around meaningful and contribution-focused assignments. The basic idea is that people go to work to make a meaningful difference, not to execute tasks. The whole HR logic is based on tasks. The whole Tayloristic approach is based on separation of the activities and trying to coordinate specializations. Even leadership development programs have become a specialization, not always a meaningful contribution. The second dimension has to do with autonomous decision-making, and that's where the perspective-taking dimension comes in. That's where the constructive development framework comes in. People differ in their perspective-taking, and their perspective-taking might be aligned with the complexity of the work, the meaningful and contribution-focused assignments, or not. When it's in line, you get engagement and energy, you get individual flow. When people are able to handle more complexity than the job requires, you come to situations of bore-out, where people are not up to handle the complexity in their meaningful and contribution-focused assignments. They risk to come into a kind of a burnout situation. But autonomous decision-making needs to be integrated, and what is often missed in coaching and leadership development are the types of dialogue spaces focused on integration. A basic idea I learned with Otto is the idea of downwardly and upwardly divided teams. Basically, the idea goes back to the question, what kind of integration is taking place in a group? And the relationship between autonomous decision-making and dialogue spaces focused on integration forms the basis for the creation of a culture where transparency and connection happens, where alienation does not get roots. And we often forget that the essence of dialogue in an organization, the essence of integration in an organization has to do with adapting, letting evolve the meaningful and contribution-focused assignments. And that means that you have systems and processes focused on learning and adapting. When the dialogue spaces and the meaningful and contribution-focused assignments are not aligned, you get systems and processes focused on registration. And in extreme forms, it creates bureaucracy. While when dialogue spaces and autonomous decision-making are not aligned, you do not get a culture of connection and transparency, but you build in alienation of people, and you build in psychological unsafety. When autonomous decision-making and meaningful contributions are not aligned, you basically get people open for the next job offer by the next headhunter contacting them. So you will have a lot of turnover in the company. What's also essential in this scheme is that you can only create autonomous decision-making and thus develop individual perspective taking, while at the same time addressing the systems and processes that embrace learning and adapting. You only get meaningful contribution dialogues when there is a culture of connection and transparency. And you only get dialogue spaces focused on integration when individuals are in flow. So that's basically the essence of the framework I'm currently working with. And let me go a bit deeper into the meaningful and contribution focused assignments. What is it that I mean? If you look at organized work, you always have a stratification in that work. And the basis is always quality and service related. The essence of business is getting and keeping customers, to which you provide a certain quality and service. And that quality and service often follows an idea of best practice. So people need to comply to the best practices in order to deliver quality and service. The mechanism through which that is happening is a mechanism of coordination. And in the word coordination, there is the word order and discipline. You need discipline in order to provide a kind of predictable quality and service. But that quality and service is always embedded in a continuous improvement activity. This is because the demands of the expectations of customers are continuously evolving. And so processes, sub-processes need to be reviewed. And the essence of reviewing is the alignment of different ideas, the alignment of different practices. The mechanisms through which that happens is the cooperation mechanism. And in cooperation, you see the word operation, the modus operandi in Latin. That is discussed. And remember the colors that I'm using here, because in just a moment we'll make a link with adult development. In an organization, often the first line manager of or team lead is not focusing on continuous improvement, but is also doing quality and service work, disabling people in the quality and service domain to make proper decisions, and disabling through the structure also the learning processes. But continuous improvement is embedded in turn in a complexity theme, a contribution theme that focuses on aligning information streams, resources streams, people across the organization. So you need to combine the efforts of different departments, of different specializations, different sets of ideas of how things need to be done. Marketing has a very different idea on how things could be done compared with IT, compared with finance, compared with production, compared with logistics. And you need a layer that focuses on integration, and the mechanisms through which integration happens is co-construction. Some of you will have done brown sheets, for example. That's a typical example of co-construction work. The work in operational flows and value streams is in turn embedded in building new future models, new business models, where design is essential, and through the design, the mechanism of co-modeling. And then you have the fifth layer, which focuses on ecosystem integration. You could say that the quality and service domain is the category of professionals working in an organization, whether they are plumbers or marketing account managers, doing work in security and safety, or in HR. A lot of work is still organized in the quality and service domain. But why am I sharing this picture? We are all familiar with the traditional organizational chart. And we all know from research that structure plays an important role in how people collaborate and work together. And every traditional organizational chart can be redrawn to a contribution-focused organizational chart. There is, in most organizations, a very poor link between the complexity theme and the meaningful contribution of functions and roles at the one side, and what is described as activities in their function and role descriptions. So if we translate this traditional organizational chart into a contribution-focused chart, we see a number of things, namely that the project management office work is designed at a higher level of complexity than the service head role, which means that the de facto leadership role will be taken by the project management office. And that blurs already an the clarity of roles and the clarity in cooperation. We can see in the drawing that the professionals at the right are the role of the professional is designed at a higher complexity team than the team leads, which disables the team leads to fully go into their sounding board role, into their coaching role. But not all professionals are the same. You have professionals working or contributing in the continuous improvement domain. And what we in this picture see are the senior professionals contributing in continuous improvement, while the professionals, junior professionals, contribute in the value stream domain. That means that those professionals, not all professionals are the same, and there will be a tension between the senior professionals and the professionals. To make a long story short, this will lead to slow decision-making, to micromanagement, to unclear responsibilities, rework, and undesirable turnover. And if you then take the team leads into a leadership development trajectory with a distance in roles of more than one versus the service head, I can assure you that those team leads will not develop if the training is purely focused on behavior or mindset or flexibility of thinking or maturity. The structure, the system plays a more heavy role than the individual in most organizations. And we know from constructive development research and the work of Otto that people evolve throughout their adulthood. And the working model that I'm working with is that in the quality and service domain, you have single expert thinkers, professionals thinking in a very logical way. It's nearly impossible to develop people who are really stuck in their logical frameworks. You need to change the roles of those people and bring them in the green zone, the continuous improvement domain, to confront them with the limits of their thinking. And the working hypothesis I'm working with is that there is a sequence in development. People first explore part-whole thinking, then dynamic thinking, then coherence thinking, and then metamorphosis thinking. And even in the identity development or what I started to define as the motivational field from which one operates, there are phases or stages of development that help you to see whether they are in line with the meaningful contributions or not. So a lot of people in the quality and service domain act in a very instrumental stage. And it becomes a problem when those people are promoted up the line. It even becomes a huge problem if instrumental people can be elected as presidents of big countries. But the essence of the developmental thinking is that it focuses our attention on a concept such as the proximal zone of development. It helps us understanding what is in reach or out of reach. What is it that people can develop with the help of others? What can they learn from on their own? And what is beyond their reach in time? And even in the model of the line of thinking, working with the zones of proximal development, the current dominant model follows a kind of a plan, do, act, check cycle, or a variant of it, addressing, doing, sensing, observing, thinking, and so on. And this is a potentially powerful process, but often misused in companies, because it only works if it is used in a way to help people moving to a next phase of perspective taking, because people evolve in a direction of handling more complexity, of kind of taking broader and more broader meta perspective on their experiences and in the work they are doing. So in reality, this model can only work if the growing of complexity handling is fully taken into account. And as it stands, the model also risks to oversimplify the reality, especially if it is reduced to a stepwise approach. In almost 3 out of 4 clients, leadership programs are now kind of designed in phases. The first phase is that you have a 1 hour kind of sensing the topic, preferably through a digital system, a small internet course. Then there is a 2-hour session where people can explore the topic a bit further. And in many companies, they are already very happy if a dialogue is integrated in those sessions. And if the person still likes the topic, for example, nonviolent communication, or a topic like delegating, planning, or whatever, name it, you have then a 1-day training that they can follow live, where there is a minimum interaction and where a trainer shares the insights. That's the current dominant model. In that model, people are confronted with questionnaires, are given proper feedback, and are invited to change their behavior. The emerging model that I would like to check with you is a model that helps you look at how you can become aware of changing the boundaries inside and outside in the difference that you're making in a company, and bringing also to the surface the possibilities that those boundaries entail. For example, if you operate as an operator handling a machine in a production process, yeah, when the IT programs change and the feedback loops change by the computer system, well, the roles will change, and the starting point of development will always be the work that is changing. And the delineation of the roles that people are fulfilling in work processes. Becoming aware of boundaries also helps to become aware of tensions. And one of our missions that we should have as developmental focused professionals is to explore the tensions with the next higher level. We have a lot of developmental frameworks, but do we really use those frameworks to create awareness on the next higher level and help people really deal with those tensions? Professionals deal with the tensions with continuous improvement. People busy or active in continuous improvement domain, they are confronted with tensions that appear in the value stream domains, in working end-to-end. As a team or a department, you are limited in an organization, and it are those limitations that form the basis to start exploring the tensions. And then you have a phase, what I call dephasing of the existing equilibrium, which basically focuses on reversing the foreground and the background relationships that people work in. And that is then followed by allowing other forms to grow, which is always ending up in a new meta equilibrium. It can go into the gradual integration of your experiences in a new identity, and letting go parts of the phase that you have been in, keeping other parts that you have experienced. The breakout room that I would like to do now is, I would like to split in groups of 3, is that we reflect a bit on the question, do we use different facilitation methodologies in those different proximal zones of development? And as a help, we can make the distinction between framing methodologies, so becoming aware of changing boundaries, engaging methodologies, so methodologies to explore the tensions with next higher level, the dephasing methodologies, and the allowing methodologies. So what is it? If we use Torbert's methodologies or Otto Laske's CDF methodology or any other model, how selective are we in creating combinations of methodologies that bring people in the proximal zone of development and enable them to take a step in their own development. The basic assumption that I'm making is that providing insight as such is a necessary condition. Self-reflection is a necessary condition, but it's completely insufficient. That would be the opener of the breakout rooms. Is the invitation clear for everyone?
Yes, it is clear, but it is also very complex.
It is indeed very complex. So I would like to invite you to have a small brainstorming, and then we come back into the group and share some ideas that have been shared in the small groups. Could you create groups of 3, Bernadette?
Sure, I'm going to pause the recording.
That popped up.
So sorry, the intro was we're going to report out from the breakout session for the recording.
Yeah.
Yes. Maria and Miguel, do you want to say something about our group? Or do you want me to say something?
Please tell.
Okay, we had a wonderful conversation, too short, but there were 2 approaches to, well, I should say this. When we speak of zone of proximal development, that's a complex issue because it seems to, on the one hand, require that we know our limits, and on the other hand, seems to require that we have at least a vague image of what lies beyond those limits for us. And so when we, and these are, of course, developmental requirements, or they are developmentally rooted. So then when we have a dialogue with others, and Miguel mentioned appreciative inquiry, and Maria spoke of what she called resonance, feeling the resonance in a group. How do we work with this? Our own knowledge of our limits and our notion of how to transcend them, while at the same time trying to understand other people's perception of their own limits and their vision of how to go beyond it, and all that focused on a particular issue, not a philosophical, but a practical issue. So that's a lot of work to do, and I don't actually know. I think Jan, I understood you, Jan, to say that you have come to working with the notion of proximal development, and you wish others would follow you in that. Is that correct?
My point of departure is a bit different. What I
Okay.
see in the competitive environment is that companies who survive do that by operating at a high level of complexity. And you can use that development in organizations to develop people and to help people see where their tensions are, and in making clear what work that needs to be done, you shape possibilities for people to make choices. Development for many people is a very abstract notion, especially also the proximal zone of development. What they feel are tensions in not being able to cope with things that change, things that become unclear in organizations, shifting boundaries, not knowing who does what anymore. There are always changes in different domains, technological changes, changes in power structure, changes in the diversity in a company when people come in and go or leave the company. So there are many tensions there. And for me, working with proximal zone of development is a step up for people to shape clarity in how they deal with tensions and how that is reflected in their professional decision making.
Would you agree, would you agree that there are at least two kinds of tensions, namely tensions coming from the organizational environment and tensions coming from the person, in terms of what the person is attempting to achieve or desires to achieve? And those tensions, I think, need to be understood by the persons involved as to where they come from, whether they come from outside or inside. And although there is no clear distinction between outside and inside for people, because it's all inside, I think there needs to be clarity about that. What is your thinking about tensions?
Well, my point of view is that the personal tensions that are created go hand in hand with the organizational tensions that are out there. There is indeed no well-defined line between inner and outer experience, but an organization is a set of processes and systems designed by people, but that live their own life. And people interact with that organization, and as such you can make a distinction between the two. But in my work, what is important is that well-being of people, well-being of individuals, and how their different perspectives get integrated. For me, I would add a third dimension. There is the organizational dimension, there is the individual dimension, and there is the team dimension. And you need to distinguish them also from the systems and processes which are in between the organizational and the team dimension, and the culture which is in between the individual perspective taking and the team integration that takes place. So I would say you need at least 6 lenses if you fully want to understand what is happening in an organization, and how the individual experience gets shaped in a certain way. We try to explain it by perspective taking, but that's kind of a, for me, an oversimplification of the reality.
Yes, yes. So it would seem to depend, it would seem that for individuals to be able to carry forward 6 different perspectives is an overwhelming requirement. It is for you as an observer that you say, we need all these perspectives. But how about the people whom you as an observer are looking at? They probably have difficulty even understanding what the next level of their own activity in the organization would look like, because only to the extent that they can conceptualize their own limits can they see beyond them.
They can see beyond them, and there are heuristics and procedures and ways of working, setting up processes, dialogical processes that enable people to get a grip on those different dimensions.
Yes.
The key for me is, or the key question is that how do we work with the hypothesis that we have? How do we really work and weave the consequences of our way of looking into practices and processes that help both individuals, teams, and organizations? And my feeling during a number of years in working with a lot of insights from constructive developmental approaches was that it pushed me in dialogues where the focus was on diagnosis. And the diagnosis as such is a necessary condition, but an insufficient condition in order to create change. People can understand a lot. People can work with multiple dimensions. It all depends on how you introduce it and how you connect it to their living experience. And the main challenge we are confronted with, I think, in this circle, I can hopefully say that the main challenge is how to make the insights we are trying to weave in our work, how we can build something that helps not only individuals, but also teams and organizations, because there is still a huge gap between the insights that we have and what is done with the insights. And what we need is a different paradigm. And it's my conviction that we can design different kinds of leadership programs that focus on handling the proximal zone of development in different ways, developing a more significant impact on the quality of collaboration, the quality of co-reflective action, the quality of spending 8-9 hours a day together, trying to accomplish something together. That's for me the main challenge. But I'm a bit running before I'm what I plan to share, continuing the after what follows from the breakout rooms. I don't know.
Thank you, Jan.
If there are any other groups who want to share something from the breakout rooms, an essential insight.
Yeah, I just want to share that one way, and I don't want to steal Norman's thunder, he's going to be speaking, but one way to simplify it a little bit is that individual is in relationship with organization. Organization is not a system as such. Organization is another living being. It's a living field. And that's, and so it's more complex than a system. It actually has a, like a soul, it has an identity, a persona. And now we can then say, okay, well, here's an individual or a team, and it's in relationship with the organization, which is another person. And now we can, it's like a husband and wife. They're going to have to negotiate, and they're going to have to build a harmonious relationship, knowing that, like a typical relationship, that there is also this thing called us, not just me and you, but us, and how do we contribute to us? So understanding organization as a living being, not just a system, because system could be mechanized, right? It doesn't have a soul.
That's true.
Right, and we go all over again. Now it's even a living system is still a system. It's not a being. So now understanding the organization is a living being and has its own persona. Now, how do these people get along or don't get along between individual, or it could be two teams. The two teams are living beings, or the department, and so it just might share more deeper insight for how we view things.
And what for you is the essence of considering an organization as a living being?
The essence is now we can actually use techniques and so on, just like we analyze living beings. We have more access to tools, we have more language to use, and we understand that as human beings, we don't understand how to relate to a system. Like, I won't have a clue, but we do understand. I understand how to live to my wife. She's a different person. And so now we can say, well, organization is inwardly focused, very strict. The person is more outwardly focused, whatever. We can now see where the conflict is and actually use the typical developmental tools to explain what's going on and make choices. How do we relate with each other, make compromises just like any other. So it just gives us a more language and more, and an ability to train the leader to see this complex world in a more practical way.
Well, for me, a living being is addressing it as something that is becoming, something that is continuously changing.
That's right.
And what I sense in your explanation is that you fall back on tools, on diagnostics. You have more language, which is good. But the question is, well, how do we, what kind of different choices do we create for people that enable them to get a grip on their own becoming process? And how do we align that with what is happening in the teams? Because a team is also a living being.
Yes.
Different teams are living beings.
Yes.
And there is no such a thing as the organization as a whole. I have not yet met a company which has one culture. Still, if you know such a company, I would be very interested to learn to know that. Yes. So I have a bit difficulties with that, but
yes, large organizations are complex. They have multiple living. Exactly. Yeah, it is complex.
What I would like to share with you in the remaining half hour is just how I set up a leadership track in a company called DPD, which is a logistics company. It's a parcel delivery company. And let me go to my presentation in order to make the animation work. I need to do it like that. So the leadership track I tried to set up was a leadership track where we focused on building dialogues within people's zone of proximal development. And it's a process, it's a program that runs over 4 days, 4 days spread over a period of 9 months, in which we start with role clarification. Role clarification is in essence helping people understand how their roles have been evolving in the last year and will further evolve and change in the next coming 2 years. So we have a perspective of 3 years, 1 year looking back, 2 years looking forward. From that, we address process ownership, and I will explain in a moment what I mean by process ownership. That's not taking responsibilities on tasks, but for processes, which makes a difference. Then the third day is focused on performance indicators. And on the fourth day, we introduce fluidity of thinking, social emotional maturity, and those types of things related to the type of decision making in their evolving roles. Now, the 4 moments in the change process, the framing, engaging, dephasing, and allowing, appear in each of the days. But in the first day, let's say, almost 60-65% is focused on framing. In the process ownership module, it's on the engaging part, about 60-65%. In the performance indicators, it's the dephasing, 65%, and in the mindset and problem handling, it's allowing new things to happen. Allowing people to take a different kind of decision making. And there are 5 conversations with a management team member, so senior management, members of the board, where people talk about how they see themselves evolving in relationship to the contribution they want to make. So contribution is kind of the overarching theme in the 4 days. And that dialogue is driven by the persons that want to develop. And I'm doing a parallel trajectory with the senior management, helping them to have those conversations with each of the individual leadership team members. We are talking here about 46 leaders involved and 7 senior management team members. So it's quite a huge project. In the framing, and in order to not spend too much time on diagnosis, we use the dynamic collaboration app as a dialogical tool to create awareness of how roles evolve, how they are designed in their relationship one to another, and where there are tensions in between the roles and how the future roles could look like, and what we can predict as tensions to emerge in those future role setup. Through the values mirror, for those familiar with Otto's work, we basically measure the fluidity of thinking, which for the client we define as the problem handling approach of people, and we measure the social emotional maturity phase, which we for the client have defined as the motivational field from which one operates. We pay a lot of attention to adapt the terminology in order that clients can connect with developmental insights. The system, for example, generates roles. This is the role of a people coach, for example. the system works with keywords that are given to the system. We invite people to think about a successful period or day in their role fulfillment, that generates, like you could say, key search words which are put in the system. The system then generates lists of possible processes or sub-processes, so different meanings the word can have. For example, if somebody says, well, you know, I was involved in a strategy dialogue, you put in strategy dialogue, and different kinds of interpretations of strategy dialogue appear on the screen. If people are working with customers, you can enter in the system communicating customers, and then you will have a different set of possible sub-processes, and people involved choose the relevant sub-processes which make sense for their individual situation. And once you have a set of sub-processes, the computer through semantic intelligence creates a storyline which gives either the existing meaning making in a role or the future meaning making, depending on how you started the role. You can do that for different roles. The system thinks through what the selection of processes means in the responsibility towards clients and stakeholders, towards innovation, towards resources, and towards planning and coordination. What we also see is that if you do that for different roles, for example, the role of process integrator, it gives a different output. The system measures the distances between the roles, so the gap in complexity handling, but also measures the inconsistencies within the role. It can be that the accountability for improvement and innovation is designed at a more encompassing level than the accountability for clients and stakeholders. So you get to the surface the tensions that appear in the system of organization of a company. And in the engaging, so we then build dialogues on how far they experience their own situation from the roles that they agreed upon. Through the process, the participants can decide whether things the computer proposes make sense for them or not, can choose for more complexity, for lower complexity. So it's a system that is, in essence, dialogically designed. In the second session, then we make the role descriptions more concrete by inviting people to describe specific incidents or situations where they had an experience that agreements were unclear and where they felt it would be useful to adjust working methods either in part or in whole. And in sharing the cases and discussing the cases, we select methods that help them to step into their proximal zone of development. We choose the methodologies in function of the current design and the to-be designed, like the SPOC methodology. SPOC is a simple methodology inviting people to analyze situations, the problems, the options, and the checks. The GRIP methodology is reflecting on the multidimensionality of the goals, the role setup that is in making up a system as a system, the type of interpersonal relationships, and the processes involved. and we are doing that to create an awareness that you can handle those situations differently. The SPOC and the GRIP methodology is a kind of a step-up methodology for a later phase to help them discover part-whole thinking, contextual thinking, or more dynamic emerging process thinking, or more coherence, relationship thinking, or metamorphosis / transformational thinking. But we relate it to the type of decision-making processes they are involved in, because it's through the daily decision-making that people make a difference. And often in addressing directly the decision-making processes that they experienced in the cases, you can engage them for a different type of decision-making, not being very much aware of the different phase of complexity handling that entails. But at the same time, we created a vertical development guide, a guide which brings them into a self-reflection and a mutual reflection process. The condition to get a vertical development guide is that you have dialogues with a buddy in the organization during at least 4 to 6 months. So we set up a buddy coaching process in which each 4 to 6 months you change, you can change the buddy, and we invite people to look at people, to look for buddies who through which they sense that they operate at a more integrated level in addressing their challenges and their pitfalls. The dephasing then is through shifting the performance indicator setup, and so the agreements made of what they focus on. We know that different contribution themes are aligned with a different setup of performance indicators. For example, if a top management team addresses issues like customer engagement is a survey-based benchmarking approach. If they use such kind of indicators at a level of breakthrough and product service portfolio, they are kind of taking away the real focus of people that need to address customer engagement. That's not the role of a top management team at all. You have at the top management level kind of how a measure of how aligned the experience of the customer and the experience of the employee are of the company, which is a predictive or leading indicator, while engagement, loyalty, engagement is even a lagging indicator. Loyalty is a current indicator. It's not because people are now loyal that they will be loyal in the future. It requires much more. So through redesigning the hierarchy of performance indicators, you create kind of a tension in the organization that creates opportunities for learning and for a different kind of becoming in the organization. At the same time, in the third moment, we look at and we use the performance indicator dialogue to look at what is the kind of integration that needs to take place in meetings and where can we adapt meeting structures, because it's through dialogue that leaders develop themselves. It's through the impact that they have. But most meetings in organizations are not designed for development, not individual development, not team development. And so we started to work with a kind of a layeredness of meeting structures, distinguishing coordination meetings from cooperation meetings, co-construction or integration meetings, and shaping the future or business model types of meetings, with helping them to see whom can be invited to optimize the learning processes that take place. Throughout the 4 days, we kind of shape a new perspective, a broader picture of an emerging humane organization paradigm, which make the shift from a tayloristic, instrumental or command and control focused organization to humane, sense and meaning making centered organization. It's a shift from looking at organizations as walled gardens. There's a lot of siloing happening in organizations, to organizations as rainforests or really living ecosystems. And what we wove into the awareness creation and building a view on a new type of collaboration are 7 emerging principles of humane organizations that we see appearing in those organizations which succeed not only in sustainable individual growth, but also sustainable organizational and sustainable team growth. And the root principles are organized along 7 dimensions, which I will briefly comment on, namely the dimension of shared meaning and purpose. That's not new, but what is essential is that you develop a kind of a reciprocal or systemic empathy. Most companies struggle with empathy traps. The gap between what they are doing and how customers experience their service is huge. Being synchronous, and in each of those dimensions, we have distinguished a developmental practice and a structural complement. So in each of the dimensions, we kind of address the structural dimension and the developmental dimension. In being synchronous, the root principle is respecting environmental integrity. And respecting environmental integrity, the structural component, for example, is moving from a circular approach of what they are doing to closing the loop for 100%, by which we mean not allowing any more products, materials go into the waste, being burned or ending up in a waste belt. That's the respect of environmental integrity. Transition pathways is the 3rd dimension, with the root principle of embracing uncertainty. The belonging and connectedness dimension is essential. As you see in the rainforest, every plant cares for the other plants. And there is a kind of a radical selfless care in those organizations. You see examples in organizations such as Haier, a Chinese organization, or the Handelsbanken in Scandinavia, which are examples of companies embracing those dimensions and emerging root principles. Self-organization is a fifth dimension where the root principle is to go for a distributed organization versus the hierarchical or team-based organizations that you have. The distributed organization structure is the third wave of organizational structures. The first being the Tayloristic organization, focused on functional specialization and the distinction of people doing the work and people thinking through the work. The second wave of organization is what I call the Toyota way organization. That's the team-based. Toyota kind of build a new system based on the deficiencies of the Tayloristic organization. But that model is becoming vastly outdated too. And you have now a evolution towards distributed organizations where organizations have complete blurred organizational borders and operate as networks internally and in networked ecosystems externally. Also, the internal organization is an ecosystemic setup. Presence is the sixth dimension where the root principle is openness to ambiguity. And the seventh is balanced growth, where you focus on the co-evolution of inner and mutual reflection. And the seven principles are in their interrelationship, each time interwoven in the cases that we discuss, each principle pointing to not only existing tensions, but also the emerging tensions within organizations, and thus in that way facilitating the choices people have for handling their tensions and stepping into what I can only summarize as their becoming process. So the root principles, how and the type of developmental processes and structural components will be described in my next upcoming book together with Kashmir Birk, which will appear in fall 2023. So you have had a small preview of that. But that's basically what we weave into those leadership development programs. Each of the seven principles are working outs of considering companies as real living systems and making it not only tangible, but also workable. I presume there are a lot of questions at this moment. So we still have 5 to 10 minutes.
It is not a question, Jan, but it's more maybe a thought I have. I have to digest more a little bit because I perceive a big distance or a gap between the service delivery concept, or the service delivery the stage, perhaps in a very initial stage, with the enterprise value that is on top of that, framework you show just a couple of minutes before. For example, to me, I have the need to elevate the idea of service in the companies. This is my fight in my work. And when you in this table of dimensions and root, to me, service, the idea, that elevated idea of service fits quite well in the dimension 4, for example, in the belonging and connectedness with the principle of selfless care. It's well, these are the, to me, the something that I would like to explore more and maybe convince you of having done that. Sorry, perhaps the word is not convince you, but perhaps perhaps the perception about service is sometimes a bit devaluated, depreciated in business.
What you're seeing is that service gets reinvented at this moment. It's not only service to customers, but
of course,
also
that's why.
To the ecosystem where you are working in, to the society and to the world. If you look at what the founder of Patagonia did over the last month, well, he gave his company to the earth as a living being. And that's a good reflection of the systemic, the overarching principles that are nowadays used in companies.
I have a question or a remark. I think something that was interesting in this process, that you practically started from the role and defining the borders and discussing that and having clarity on the role. And then the last part was moving the attention to this process of becoming and vertical development and human development. And can you elaborate more on that? Because I have this idea that when we have kind of the role boundaries and all that, more clarity around that, then maybe this becoming is easier for us, and how those support one another.
Well, it is. You need a kind of a design table. Designing is basically shaping tensions, and Otto also mentioned it a small hour ago, that it's not easy to help people to transcend their limits. So you can only transcend limits when you help people not only discover the limits, but also define how they can transcend those limits. And the principles are a way of doing that. So in Germany, for example, you have the beta approach now. The beta approach is a transformational approach, dialogically based, and that enables you to collectively engage in a dialogue to handle tensions much differently. And so instead of putting the focus on the diagnostic part, I'm putting now more and more the focus on the dialogical part. What kind of practices and ways of thinking together do you see in sustainable growth companies that you can use as inspirational sources in the companies you're working with, and weave that into leadership development programs. Leadership development programs focused paradoxically not on the individual as the first priority, but on the organization as a first priority, through which you make the individual tension, you give a context to the individual tensions, allowing them to be handled in different ways, in more different ways. That's a bit my line of thinking. So in order to develop individuals, do not focus on the individuals, but focus on the conditions you create to help people become what they could become. And that's basically why I arrived at this moment. And it's a bit counterintuitive because the assessments that we do are individual assessments, while most of the work that happens in companies is team-based. And so we need to find team-based approaches for individual development. We need to find structural conditions that enable processes of becoming. It's not because you engage with an individual and help them to become aware of the limits in his thinking or in his social emotional the social emotional field from which he operates, that you help people. You help people when you can connect those findings with what happens in organizations, helping them to address the tensions that they experience in different ways.
Yeah, I very much agree. It is a situational context. You're absolutely correct. And if just individual is not enough, you need to put it in within the environment and in the context of what they're doing in the team. That's my personal experience as well.
Yeah. And most role shifts appear because a company is forced to make shifts and embracing one or more of the 7 principles that I just showed you. So companies are pushed to become more circular, to embrace the ecosystem by European law. The Green Deal, for example, is pushing them into that direction. It has a huge impact on how work is organized. So people have no choice to develop. And if you give them no choice to develop, more people will develop. When I'm saying paradoxically, you should not give them the choice to develop or not develop, you should create an environment where they do not think about not developing in a certain way. Because if they do not develop, well, their employability will degrade. And when their employability degrades, well, they will not have an income anymore. Big silence now.
There is like this something that I've been pondering is that quite often we talk about that our organization needs to develop, then they recognize that these are the strategic capabilities that now the individuals need to develop. Then they go to some course where they do try to develop in those things, and I see that it quite often maybe does anything actually happen from the point of view of development when it is done like that, and how is that what you're describing different from that what approach that most often is done?
Well, what's different is that my argument or my invitation is to work with the different dimensions at the same time. In most strategic or capability focused exercises, strategy or capability work is seen as a specialized domain where things need to be done, where you can measure, identify the gap, and then fill the gap. That's not the process of becoming. That is not in line with any of the principles that I outlined in that work. The wind of the organizational design is not taken into account. The wind of perspective taking is not taken into account. The wind of the type of integration that takes place in a team is not taken into account. The culture is not taken into account. The consideration whether or not systems and processes are aimed for learning is not taken into account. The individual flow is not taken into account. So most of the exercises the big consultancy companies engage in are, well, very specialized, fragmented exercises, more rituals, like the rituals you found in ancient Greece. If the king wanted to go to war, what he did was go to the temple, to the high priests, and then the high priests had their stones, mixed them, put them in a kind of a bowl. They looked at them and they said, well, dear king, today is not a good day to go for war. There was no relationship between what they did and what they advised. Most big consultancy houses, and I'm often asked to take over projects of McKinsey, Anderson Consultants, Ernst & Young's. I had them all. When I'm asked to take over those initiatives, what each time fascinates me is the level of fragmentation that they demonstrated, not connecting the dots at all. Basically a very mechanistic system that underpins their interventions. While what I'm pleading for, at least what I try to do today, is force yourself to look at the 6 dimensions simultaneously, weave them simultaneously in a trajectory. Think through how you can frame, engage, dephase, and allow within a same initiative, and you will build much richer initiatives. When you start thinking of becoming as a process in which people develop to a kind of a new equilibrium, a new level, that means that you need ideas about level shifts. How many level shifts do you take into account in the approaches that you take? If you work with Agile, are you working with the Agile models that have embraced maturity, or are you still in the old-fashioned Toyota type Agile translations? That's what I'm pleading for. Have ideas on the transitions and select models, and there are plenty of models that embrace the maturity ID, the phase ID, the stage ID, and think through the alignment of those models to the zone of proximal development of the participants in your process. Because one model can make fully sense in one context or situation and make no sense at all in another situation.
Thank you,
Does it make
Jan,
sense?
for your wonderfully rich exposition of ideas that we all, I think, need and want to develop. And thank you, thank you. It was one of the most rich presentations on organizational functioning and planning and strategizing that I can remember.
Thank you, Otto. It's 9:10. Questions also. And I hope to see you again in the next session. If you follow my LinkedIn, you will learn where I will give my next session next week, for example, in CO in Spain, where I will connect developmental approaches with Stefan Beer's approach, the viable systems theory and model. So you will find me if you follow me.
I'll be there, Jen, next week. Yeah.